Okay, be honest. When you first played Mortal Kombat, fought your way through the arcade ladder, and finally reached the final fights, you came face to face with the bosses and got swiftly destroyed by them, with a mix of them doing the counter to what you just did on the frame you did it, slamming you with unblockables, and whatever else they decide to throw at you. Boss fights in any game are meant to be a significant point of the experience and a challenge much harder than what the player has faced up to that point, and in fighting games this is no different, just not necessarily in the way that you think. Old school fighting game AI is infamous for being cheap, feeling like they're reading your mind and generally causing you to use a continue over and over again. Not a huge surprise though, as remember, in the arcades it was pay per play, so if the game was too easy, many players would just be able to beat it in one go and the game wouldn't make much money. So it was about making sure the endgame bosses are hard enough that they take multiple continues to learn to beat, but ultimately still beatable so the player gets the satisfaction of finishing it whilst up against so much difficulty. However, this isn't exclusive to just the arcade MKs, as boss fights are present in many other games as well and are still a pain in the backside and overall cause of frustration and misery for gamers worldwide. We are Ketchup and Mustard, and in today's video, we're going to show you 5 rage-inducing boss fights across the Mortal Kombat franchise. Before we start, I'm doing the YouTube thing real quick. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, turning on notifications, and check out our other videos in this playlist. Number 5. MK Deception Onaga. When it comes to 3D era MK bosses, it's likely that every player has their own toughest pick, whether it be Moloch, Blaze, or in this video's case, Onaga. Before I say anything, I want to point out that I don't actually think Onaga is the hardest 3D era boss, but we're talking straight up frustration and cheapness. Oh my god, does it go to Onaga. Onaga is the final boss of MK Deception, and the first PS2 MK that the big bad was at the end of the arcade ladder. Lore-wise, Shujinko fights Onaga by using the power of the Kamidogu, and this translates into gameplay by having the Kamidogu dotted around the edge of the stage, and when the player walks into one, Onaga is stunned for a free hit, which does make Onaga quite easy if you're playing certain characters with long combo strings who can easily dispatch him in a few combos. However, if you don't know that, or are simply playing a character without a high damage option, this fight is a pain. Onaga can't be hit by certain attacks like some fireballs, has options everywhere on screen, takes much less damage than usual, and to top everything off, his entire arena is a 360 death trap that he can't be hit by. His fireball can knock you into it, as well as tons of other attacks, and overall he can just rob you out of nowhere. I get he's a boss fight, so it kinda is the point, but screw him. I can't tell you how many times this fight caused me to just give up as a kid. Number 4. MK4 Goro. Some might call this one a sub-boss, but this is actually one of those cases where the penultimate fight was way harder than the actual final fight. In MK4, Goro is back in business, and once again the fight that leads into the actual arcade ladder final fight, with Shinnok waiting for you if you can get past him. But in this case, forget about it, because Goro is the true boss of this game. The typical 4-armed sub-boss is nothing new in MK, but trust me when I say that even by the usual standards of MK1 Goro or MK2 Kintaro, MK4 Goro really does run away with it. His damage output is simply absurd, and all the usual Goro moves are here to cause problems in worse ways than usual. Stomp is lightning fast, his command grab just deletes you, fireballs aren't very good in MK4, but Goro's still manages to work just fine. Like all the bosses in these games, you can cheese it with certain characters, but I'm talking that familiar experience that we all know. Not aware of high level strats, just getting up to him and hitting a brick wall. And no fight in MK4 did this quite like the Goro encounter. Probably the most frustrating experience fighting Goro in any MK in my opinion. Number 3. MK2 Shao Kahn. Alright everyone, don't panic, he did make the list, don't worry. Shao Kahn in MK2 is not fair. Maybe the absolute perfect example of a classic boss that if you're playing against normally, feels almost unbeatable, but if you know how to cheese them, they become a complete pushover. But again, when you're playing him for the first time, or maybe didn't have access to the internet to see what people were doing, or you didn't play in the arcades when this kind of info would circulate amongst the players, you're just fighting him naturally and getting smacked over and over again. Absolutely the definition of reading your moves, doing tons of damage, slamming you with a relentless barrage of shoulders which are chunking for a third of your health each time, and whatever else he feels like doing to you really. And to make matters worse, he trash talks you the entire time, literally adding insult to injury.
All too easy.
From a design point of view, I think this fight is really cool still, because again, if you've not seen this for the first time, there are some neat bits of flavor that really add to the fact that, yes, this is the final boss. You exclusively fight him in Khan's arena, and this is the first time he's not seen sitting on the throne in the background. And because Shao Kahn is the game's announcer, he doesn't say the usual round intros, and instead just threatens or insults you.
Prepare to die.
Definitely a fitting final boss that truly feels like one, and when you get the win, oh lord, the satisfaction is immense. Number 2, MK Mythology's Fujin. In the intro, I mentioned that we'd be seeing frustrating bosses in other MKs too, and here is one of them. Considered one of the most difficult games on the PS1/N64, and definitely a game that has quite the reputation, MK Mythology Sub-Zero is a 2D platforming adventure game where you take control of the original Sub-Zero, Bi-Han, and participate in a number of events that predate the tournament of Mortal Kombat 1. Personally, I actually really like this game. I even speedrun it, which you can find runs of on this very channel, but we're not talking about that today. We're talking about maybe the game's most infamous boss fight, and that's the boss at the end of Stage 2, Fujin. Unlike the boss fights in the other PS1 spin-off, Special Forces, which can all effortlessly be trivialized with a single button, no joke, the bosses in Mythologies are much more akin to the arcade-style bosses, i.e. move reading, hitting you right as you do something, and generally being a huge pain in the backside. However, what makes the Fujin fight so frustrating is unlike the arcade games where you're only a push of the start button away from having another go, Mythologies is an adventure game. You have finite lives and continues. If you run out, you go back to the beginning of the whole game. It's level 2, so you might think, well, what's so bad about that? But Stage 2 is the Wind Temple, which is the point that many players will just give up on and don't complete, because it's easily one of the trickiest stages in the game, and is full of instant death traps, pitfalls, annoying enemies, and more. To make the Fujin fight itself even more difficult, if you manage to get him low on health, he goes for this final whirlwind attack that will literally just kill you. We've all been there, seeing this and thinking, oh, what the hell do I do now? And the lives just keep ticking away. You're supposed to go to the edge of the stage, crouch, and Sub-Zero will go into this holding the ledge animation. How is the player supposed to know that? I say just learn the speedrun strat and be done with it, to give Fujin a taste of his own medicine. Number 1. MK Shaolin Monk's Final Boss Sequence. This was always going to be my number 1. Yes, I know the mainline games are full to the brim of cheap AI with their move reading and huge damage and more health etc, but Shaolin Monks really did take the cake when it came to ultimate endgame challenge. Shaolin Monks is a cult classic, a masterpiece in 2-player couch co-op adventure brawling, and made by the team that went on to create the God of War series. One of my favourite games of all time and more than deserving of a remake in the modern era. The game has you playing through the events from the end of MK1 through to the end of MK2. The player travels the realms, fighting bosses, exploring the realms, and beating up bad guys by the dozens in an overall fun and exciting package. I really like this game, as I'm sure you can tell. However, the final sequence of the game is a boss fight and a half. You reach Shao Kahn's arena and enter the fight. You have to beat Shang Tsung, Kintaro, and Shao Kahn all on the same life bar with no rest in between. The game gives you a small health item each fight, but the boss's attack will undo that in one hit, and if you lose to any of them, you have to start at the beginning of it every time. The Shang Tsung fight involves him morphing into the other characters that you've seen through the game. He takes less damage when morphed and cycles through many different movesets, which does keep you on your toes. Kintaro isn't that bad, but has some irritating unblockables that will chunk if you get caught out. But here comes big man Shao Kahn, who starts almost every fight fully on the offense and pelts you with projectiles, quick shoulders, basically all of his moves from the main game, but way scarier as, like I said, you have to fight them all on the same life bar. To make matters worse, he has 2 phases, and at the start of the second phase is where many players will remember hitting the wall, as this is where Shao Kahn will start fighting with his hammer. And he has a signature move where he just spins for ages, and if you get hit by it once, he's probably killing you for it. This is another game that Ketchup and I speedrun a lot, and in co-op this move is pretty much a guaranteed loss, as the screen doesn't move and will combo the player fully until the end. The cherry on top is that if you're playing the PAL version of this and are on a fresh save, there's a chance that the game will freeze in the final loading screen before you fight Shao Kahn, causing you to have to restart and not being able to skip any of the cutscenes. Fitting end to a solid game though, as much like the other bosses, they can all be learned and dealt with cleanly. But for less experienced players, this is the ultimate frustrating gauntlet to end the game on, certainly saving the toughest till last. And that's 5 rage-inducing boss fights in Mortal Kombat. Once again, let us know in the comments what your personal pick would be for frustrating bosses. MK certainly has enough to go around, but even with the frustration factor, I feel these games would be less without them. Part of the nostalgia comes from the struggles as well as the successes, so even if I could, I wouldn't change a thing about them. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.